So let's just start with the basics. What is a tariff in the first place? A tariff is a tax on an imported good. So the importing company pays that tax when their product is shipped into that foreign country. So for example, let's say there's a 25% tariff on Volkswagen cars being imported from Germany. Germany pays 25% for each product, for each vehicle. So if the vehicle is $30,000 value, they pay $7,500 tax on each of those vehicles. Now, Volkswagen's not going to take a $7,500 loss on each vehicle. They're going to raise the price accordingly in order for them to still be able to turn a profit. So what happens with tariffs is yes, the company has to pay the tax, but they're also going to increase the price for their product, and the end consumer is going to end up eating that cost. So Volkswagen cars are now going to be 25% more expensive accordingly. Now, why would you do that? Why would a country put a tariff in place if that means consumers are going to have to pay higher prices? Well, there's several reasons, and one of them is to protect your own businesses. If there's a tariff on Volkswagen cars and they have to sell their cars for 25% more, then people might buy American cars. Might buy more American cars because they're more competitive on price. To use another example, like let's say Vietnam. Vietnam can make T-shirts very cheaply because their labor costs are very low. And maybe if you want a mass order of T-shirts, they could do it for $3 a pop. But if you wanted to buy it for an American company, maybe they're doing it for $5 or $6 a piece. Well, if we put a tariff on Vietnam, then they have to sell their T-shirts for more, and that means we close the gap on price. Now people are more likely to buy from the American company that weren't before. The second reason really just goes in tandem with that, and that is if you're protecting your own country's businesses, then that will lead to more job opportunities and more investment domestically. So if American companies are getting more market share in the t-shirt business or in the car business or any industry, then that means they're going to be more likely to hire, more likely to expand, more likely to build locations and do their own manufacturing. So that would be good for your country because you're getting more of those jobs and more of that opportunity and not other countries, at least, again, in principle. Another reason or another benefit of putting tariffs in place is to increase government revenue. That's another tax. So the main way that we make money as the federal government, the U.S. federal government, is through income taxes and through payroll taxes. That accounts for about 85% of our total revenue. Tariffs make up a very small fraction right now. However, if we raise our tariff rates across the board, that could bring in more revenue, help us with our deficit, our gap between how much we bring in and how much we spend each year. And then the other benefit, or the other big reason that a country might put a tariff in place, is to use it to pressure other countries. And I think that's a really big component of what's going on right now. The U.S. is the world's biggest customer. Mexico and Canada and China and the EU, we buy a lot of their stuff. And we buy more than any other country out there. And so those countries want us as a customer. And if we're putting a tariff on them and making it such that their products are more expensive and less likely to be bought, that might put pressure on them to want to come to the negotiating table and say, hey, let's work out a new deal here. So tariffs can be a way to hit other countries where it hurts and get them to the negotiating table, but it could also backfire, as we're about to talk about, if a deal can't be struck. Now, why does President Trump love tariffs? Let's just kind of lay out the general economic theory here. And in order to understand that, we need to look at Peter Navarro. Maybe you've heard that name here recently. Peter Navarro is Trump's top trade advisor, and he's really been kind of the architect behind the scenes of the policy that Trump has somewhat started to implement, but it's not a carbon copy of what Peter Navarro has laid out, as we're about to see, but he would be kind of the main guy. If you want to try to understand what the tariff policy and economic policy of the Trump administration is all about, probably the best resource you can look at is Peter Navarro and what he's laid out. So President Trump has been talking about tariffs for years. This is nothing new. This is not like out of the blue. You can go back decades ago. He was talking about tariffs. He fundamentally views trade and international trade as a zero-sum game. This is a very important part of Trump's philosophy and his approach to international diplomacy. Trump kind of views things as a fixed amount. Like there's only so much out there. It's a zero-sum game. So it's all about how do I get the better net deal. So maybe to use the analogy of a poker game here, Trump is viewing international trade and international politics like a poker game with a set amount of chips. And if we want to use that analogy, the United States would be the chip leader at the moment. We have the most economic resources, and we also have a pretty good hand. And so Donald Trump, being the deal maker that he is, kind of views like, hey, I've got a strong hand. I'm the chip leader. I'm going to kind of throw my weight around. I'm going to raise other people's hands and try to get them to part with some of their chips. I'm going to try to wrest away from other people some of the things that I feel that they've been ripping us off on. And Peter Navarro, Trump's advisor, he really believes, and Trump believes, that America's trade deficits are a really big problem. And when I say trade deficit, what we're talking about here is the fact that we buy more from other countries than they buy from us. That's a trade deficit. If we spend more on their stuff than they spend on ours, then that gap, that difference, is a deficit. More money is exiting our country to go to them than is coming from them to us. All right, and especially China, this is true, and this has been true for a while now, and that trade deficit has grown. And so Peter Navarro, President Trump, say they look at that as like, hey, we're losing chips. we're losing ground to China because our money's going out the door to them, and not as much money is coming back to us. So in order to rectify that, here's the strategy. What we're going to do is we're going to raise tariffs. We're going to put tariffs on foreign goods, steel, electronics, clothing, batteries, all these different things, and it's going to make their stuff be more expensive. And when their stuff is more expensive, then it's going to help us to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. We used to make stuff here in America. You think back to, the steel industry, the car industry, especially in the Midwest. Like, manufacturing was a really big staple of the American economy. We're going to bring those jobs back. We're going to make stuff in America again, build factories here, and instead of those things going to Mexico and China and other countries like they have been for the last few decades, we're going to start building American again. And when that happens, we're going to be creating more jobs. There's going to be higher wages. It's going to be a new revolution, an economic revolution within the United States. And another big reason that he wants to do this is to strengthen national security. They don't like the idea of foreign countries making most of our medical equipment and our pharmaceuticals and our tech, the things that we use every day. And I understand that argument. And when we do this, when we put these tariffs, when we bring jobs, we start doing manufacturing here in the United States, we're going to force better deals. We're going to bring those countries to the negotiating table because they need us. They need us as a customer, and when they come to the negotiating table, we're gonna hammer out better terms for America. So that's the policy, that's the principle in a nutshell. Now, in reality, President Trump has done some of those things that Peter Navarro outlines, but he has not done everything. And to give you a recent example is he's really gone after China with these tariffs, but he's given out exemptions, like, for instance, on different like tech or electronic components that would really benefit like Apple, because Apple is such a large part of the U.S. economy and U.S. stock market. So it's like we're doing some things, but not everything. It's kind of a little bit of piecemeal, and obviously things are changing on the hour as I'm recording this. I know by the time you listen to this, many of these things could be outdated. It could be antiquated just a day or two from now. Now, this idea of trade deficits, do they matter? Does it matter that China, that we buy more stuff from China than they buy from us? And to give you some numbers, in 2024, we bought about $300 billion more from China than they did from us. We bought about $235 billion more from the European Union countries than they did from us. President Trump, Peter Navarro, they would look at this as a huge problem. Personally, I do not. I do not see that this is a problem because if you want to look at it this way, I also have a massive trade deficit right now with Costco, with Amazon. I have bought a lot of things from them, and they have never, ever bought anything from me. And you say, that's because they are ripping you off, Nate. See how much money you've given them? How much money have they given you? Zero. That's a bad deal. You're getting ripped off. No, I don't think so. And I think as you look at your bank statement, your credit card statement, you wouldn't say you're getting ripped off by, your mortgage company or by a restaurant that you ate at recently. I mean, unless you just had a bad experience. You get what I'm saying? Like, you traded money for a good or for a service that you felt was worth it, right? So yes, I have spent a lot of money on Amazon or on Costco, but I have received for that money value that I thought was fair. And the US right now still leads the world in innovation. We still build amazing things. We lead the world in building things like airplanes and technology, and we lead in finance and entertainment. And so the fact that we buy a lot more stuff from other countries than we export is a sign that we have robust discretionary spending power. We have very high earnings, very high wages. We have money to spend, and very often we choose to spend that on things that other countries make. And much of the US workforce has moved away from manufacturing. We've as time has gone on, Americans have moved out of the middle class and into the upper class. That's an amazing thing. We talk about like the middle class shrinking. The reason the middle class is shrinking is not because people are going down the ladder. It's for the most part, it's because they're going up the ladder. They're leaving the middle class to go to the upper class. And that means they're moving away from manufacturing and they're moving into more lucrative sectors like medicine, like technology, like science, like engineering. In other words, Americans by and large aren't wanting to do manufacturing jobs. They're wanting better opportunity. So there's this weird thing that's happening right now where when you poll people and say, would America be better off if we had more manufacturing, we brought manufacturing back to the United States, a lot of people would say yes, that would be a good thing. But then when you ask people on an individual personal basis, would you like a job in manufacturing, the vast majority of people say no, because we like this idea in theory of manufacturing coming back to the United States, but many of the jobs that manufacturing would bring are the jobs that most Americans are interested in doing. And that's by and large why they've been going to other countries, because in other countries, those are the types of jobs that people are like, yes, they would snap up in a heartbeat because, again, the income potential there is just very different for Mexico and for China and for a lot of these other countries. So another really important point that I need to highlight here, because there's a massive misunderstanding here. What are the tariff rates that other countries are charging us? Before this point, before Trump introduced the new tariff rates, like previously, what were people charging us? I'm sure you've seen a picture of that chart that President Trump is holding, showing how much other countries charge us in tariffs and how much we're going to start charging them. There's a really big misunderstanding here about what that chart is showing. Okay, so when you look at that chart, and again, this was like last week. I know that this is changing on the hour. So much of this is subject to change on a very short basis. It showed numbers like this. China's tariff rate on us is 67%. The European Union tariff rate on us is 39%. The Vietnam rate on us is 90%. You look at those numbers, you're like, what on earth is going on here? That's exorbitant. These countries are ripping us off. Like, that's ridiculous. Of course, if China's charging us 67%, 39%, 90%, yeah, charge them tariffs too. How dare they take advantage of us in that way? But this is where the misunderstanding comes in. Those are not the actual tariff rates. That's a special formula that President Trump's team is taking to try to calculate all of it together. What they charge us in tariffs, but also our trade deficit and our currency manipulation. And as I've already said, I don't view the trade deficit as a huge issue. Things like currency manipulation and stealing intellectual property, those are a problem, and those should be addressed. But a trade deficit in and of itself is not necessarily a problem. But of course, the Trump administration is looking at it like a problem, and they're using that in their formula to show what the quote unquote tariff rate that China and all these other countries are charging on us, and it's just not the actual number. The average tariff rate for China was about 20%, not 67%, and a lot of stuff was exempt, like smaller items, less than $800. So think like Shane and Temu. I think I'm saying those things correctly. I've never bought anything on either of those sites. I'm sorry for those that are fans. So I think I'm saying this right. Those were exempt. Those didn't have tariffs on them. The average tariff rate for EU was 5%, not 39%, and so on and so forth. You go just down the line. Like the actual tariff rates that those countries were charging us is not anywhere close to the numbers that are listed on that chart. So in fact, for the last several decades, tariff rates have been going down, and the most prosperous countries have generally been getting rid of tariffs. Like, we had NAFTA with Canada, United States, and Mexico back in '93, and the European Union, that's been a big part of like the European Union and cooperation economically, is like, let's get rid of tariffs, let's have free trade, let's lower the cost so everybody will be better off. It's really important to emphasize here that the actual tariff rates being charged to the U.S., not the numbers that are being cited. And many imports and exports have no tariffs. A lot of times what you're going to see is that like certain products have no tariffs, but then certain products have a special tariff. So like, for example, we have a 25% tariff on pickup trucks imported from the EU because our politicians would like to protect Ford and Chevy and have people buying American pickup trucks and not European pickup trucks. So it's kind of interesting when you get into the weeds on some of those policies related to tariffs. But it brings us to the question that, to this question: Why is the market reacting so negatively to tariffs? I mean, after all, as we outlined, if tariffs will lead to American businesses getting more market share and hopefully creating more jobs and more opportunity for America, why wouldn't the market like that news? Why wouldn't that be good for American companies? Is this going to lead to a recession? Well, just think about the logical progression of what would happen if those tariff rates were to go into place. So if there's a across the board 10% or 20% tariff rate, it's going to lead to higher prices. And higher prices on things that are discretionary. Things that people could buy or they could not buy. So, when you think about like clothing or sporting goods or restaurants, these are the type of places that people will spend money on when they have money, but when things are tight, they stop spending money on. Vacations, hotels, cruises. And when people stop spending money on those things because their prices have gone up, then that leads to fewer purchases. And what do companies do when they're not getting as much revenue? When money's not coming in like it used to, they lay off people, they don't expand like they were before, they put on hiring freezes, they give out fewer raises, they slash benefits. And then what happens to people? When they have lower income, when they've lost their job, they don't have as much purchasing power. And now we start this vicious cycle all over again. So that's why the market is reacting so negatively, because that's the logical progression of probably what would happen. Now, that's why the market's also been bouncing around, because it's like, tariffs are on, tariffs are off. No, they're back on. No, these are off, but these are still on. And these are, so it's like every single day people are trying to react to what the newest and latest is. You say, but Nate, it's not just about tariffs. And I would agree with that statement. If you're like, hey, Nate, I understand tariffs are part of the equation, but Trump is doing more than this. He's playing three-dimensional chess here. Okay, I do agree with that to an extent. I do believe that Donald Trump is all about making deals. I tried to go this entire episode without saying art of the deal, but there it is, the art of the deal. I mean, that's his MO. Be unpredictable. Throw out an aggressive proposal. Make people think you're capable of anything. Get them to the negotiating table and strike a new and better deal. But I think it's entirely reasonable to think that Donald Trump doesn't want high tariff rates, that this is all a big bluff, and they're all going to go away. But it's also, I think, equally reasonable to feel like he really does believe in tariffs, because again, he's been talking about this for a long time. This isn't just out of the blue, and I think it's very plausible to say he would like tariffs to remain and also negotiate new trade deals. It could be both. Now, could tariffs replace income tax? You say, well, Nate, one of the silver linings out of all of this could be that yes, this could lead to higher prices, but if that comes with the added bonus of no income tax anymore, it could be worth it. And to that I would say yes, if tariffs could replace the income tax, maybe it would be worth it, but is that realistic? Well, here are the numbers. If we implement somewhere between 10 to 20% tariff rates, we could expect that to bring in about $200 to $300 billion a year to the federal revenue, which is not chump change. That's a considerable amount that would help us close some of that gap between how much we're spending and how much we're bringing in. Definitely not close that gap, but get us closer. Here's the problem, though. Last year, we brought in $2.4 trillion from income taxes, which means tariffs would only bring in about 1/10 of that. So if we want tariffs to replace income taxes, they don't need to be 10 to 20%. They need to be somewhere between like 100 to 150%. And then we would need all of those countries to pay that 100 or 150% tariff and not seek alternatives, which of course is not going to happen. So the answer is no, not even close. Will tariffs replace the income tax? No. Will they close the deficit? No. Will they help? To an extent, but they will also come at a cost, and that is higher prices and the possibility of pushing us into recession territory. So what can we expect going forward? You're like, Nate, give me some good news. What can we expect? Well, how's this all going to shake out? Well, no one knows. No one knows except Trump, and even then I'm not so positive about him. It's just a very fluid situation. We really don't know, and I think this is very much a read and react type of situation. Right now, as of me recording this, Trump has paused tariffs temporarily on everybody except for China, and he really seems intent on focusing primarily on China. They're our chief political economic adversary, and the one that we do a lot of trade with, so understandably we're kind of playing hardball with them. anybody who says they know how this is going to shake out, just run away from those people. All right, nobody knows. Anybody who's trying to speak with great certainty about exactly how this all plays out, they don't know. All right, we're gonna find out day by day together. You say, okay, well, Nate, what should I be doing then about this? Given all the uncertainty, given the crazy market volatility, how should I respond? Well, the previous episode, I just talked about that, how to respond to a market downturn. It's the same things I would say in any market downturn, but especially now as our minds are more focused in on what's happening with our 401ks and our investments. So I hope you'll go back and listen to that. And as I talk about, how we've navigated previous market downturns and things that we can proactively do that are in our control today to be able to make it through this market downturn best we know how. So thanks as always for listening. Hope that was helpful. Hope that cleared up some questions maybe that you had. And I know we're getting bombarded with noise on every side these days. So I thought that would be a helpful, timely episode for you. Thanks as always for following and listening. I'll see you on the next one.